Good day, everyone. My name is Melissa Hunter Davis, founder of Sugarcane Magazine. And this afternoon, I am in conversation with Alan Kwabena Frimpong and Auttrianna Ward. Thank you for joining me, Alan and Auttrianna.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Auttrianna, you said something really important. You said that you were able to stay in Los Angeles because of the prior work that you did with Alan and Zeal. So tell me about being a creative in 2024, what that requires, and how you've been able to live a rich life doing with love. And when I say rich life, it doesn't mean that you're having caviar on chips every day for lunch, but it does mean
I
that you
literally had caviar on chips last night at the after party for opening.
right. But it does mean that you are able to live as a creative.
Mm.
There are so many people who wish they could quit their jobs. I went to college with this guy who lives in Trinidad now, and he said his dream was to quit tech and be a math teacher. He said, but I just can't afford to live off a math teacher's salary. So you have gone on and gone into the arts, gone through a master's program, you've become a curator, and you're doing what you love. How have you made that happen?
Um, yeah, so shout out to Gigi's in LA, which has excellent caviar and chips.
Take a little note right here, GG's. Okay.
I got to enjoy a whole little section by myself. It was really nice. Yeah, so I mean, I think just like full transparency. So I was working like 2000. I've been working in the arts professionally since like 2015. And from 2015 to 2018, I was working like in finance or like in the mortgage industry, real estate, mortgage and real estate. And I was like, oh, I want to use that money to funnel into creative projects. But because it had a sales element, it wasn't super consistent. Um, and so I ended up just getting to a point where I just got really tired and I it's a funny story. Like I borrowed some money and I was going to go to the grocery store, and instead I decided to go to this open house for Micah and for my friend who's an artist. And so we joke about this so much, but I went to the open house and I had assumed that I couldn't go into grad school because I didn't have like the greatest grades in undergrad. Um, and they were like, well, that's not, there's been so much time between you graduating from undergrad and you've done so much since then. And so I was able to really develop a proposal for my program. And I was supported by Micah in my grad school program while I was getting my MFA. And then after that, I built up the artist residency that I hosted, Mari residency, um, and just became used like my sales experience to work out with fundraising, and was able to support myself through like school um, and then I graduated in the pandemic, um, and I am a proponent of universal basic income because the financial support that we were given during the pandemic was actually like quite helpful for me. And yeah, and then now as of late, I'm building out my company, Auttrianna Projects, which is a creative firm and a publishing house. And so I've been more in the consulting realm, but also not. I don't. I've had to build a hybrid for myself where I don't entirely rely on my creative income to support me, but I have a consulting practice that I really love. And which is helping folks build out artist residencies, which is consulting with hotels and boutique restaurants to think about the art in their space. And I've also been very fortunate to have the support of family as well. So it's just definitely like a mixture of pooling resources. And I yeah, I mean, I think that I'm not necessarily like where I want to be yet, but I'm building to get there. And I think something that is really beautiful about the way that Zeal and Alan talk is about financial sustainability, and just like really thinking creatively about our worth as artists and creative workers, um, and leveraging that to protect our values and like not have to do work that we don't want to do or don't feel comfortable doing, or that questions our values. So um yeah, because I had been living in London the year before, and I got more opportunities, more curating gigs, more speaking gigs, more presentation gigs, all sorts of things in LA in my first year there than I did in London. So I also think that LA is a really has a really vibrant ecosystem for
Mhm.
if you're able to tap into it.
So, Alan, is this the reason why you created the co-op so that creatives could work together and create other opportunities?
Absolutely. I had a lot of curiosity as somebody who, coming up, was an artist in hiding, if you will, but also having a lot of friends who were in the fine art world, such as Latoya Ruby Frazier. I would go to her openings, whether it was at the Whitney or the MoMA, and just had a personal relationship with her family. Um, and other creatives, and I would just see the process of their work, and then also hearing a lot of the challenges, which is what led me to starting Zeal, because I too wanted to explore my own creative passions while also keeping to like my values around social justice and change. A lot of my work had been in organizing and philanthropy prior to me starting Zeal. And so for me, it was a blending of those passions so that I could live a much more whole and full life, and do so in community with other Black creatives, and try to figure out these pieces around like, what does pay equity look like
Right.
for artists? And partnering with other institutions or organizations like Wage, workers, working artists for a greater economy, that's based in New York City. And I remember they were one of the first organizations that was calling out a lot of the injustices that were happening at the Brooklyn Museum, and the gentrification that it was fostering in the community. So, yeah, a lot of even what Auttrianna mentioned around like universal basic income, like what would it look like to pull from the historic work of WPA and others, to say that artists should be, and anyone should be getting universal basic income, given the kind of economic threats that our society is under. And at this point, we're talking about the pandemic, but that can be a huge benefit to artists who are going to be engaging in the overall sustainability and thriving of a community. So, yeah.
Touching on community, Adriana mentioned that community was an important part of her practice. How have you been able to marry community with doing high level work that's expected of serious art practitioners?
Even in the launch of this project for the multimedia anthology on reparations, I think the preparation that it took really was from the learnings that we gained from being in Miami. Because I think another one of our tenets as a cooperative is that we want to work locally wherever we are, and that with that local work, we want to have global impact. And so I think learning from working with folks like yourself, Melissa, other cultural institutions and organizations, whether it was work that we were doing with Marie Vickles at the Perez Art Museum, or work that was being done with IPC, with the Photography Center, or with the Little Haiti Cultural Complex. We were always trying to figure out what were your immediate needs, what are the topics of discussion that mattered the most, and how can we as an art co-op really do the weaving between those needs and capacities and the resources that can be brought to bear, so that we can be, as you talked about, the feeling of being rich, right? We can be resource rich, but also coordination rich, and attuning to those things. So I feel like our ability to provide some level of production support, if you will, towards realizing those necessary conversations that needed to be had or events that needed to be produced that provided an immersive experience for uh, art lovers and patrons really became, I think, the center point of how we approach the work, which is looking at people's needs and their values and how those can be met. And if they can't be met in the moment, what are some intermediary things that we can do with our local partners to get there? And I feel like that has informed our work in these two initial exhibitions for the anthology on reparations in Inglewood, California, and then also following up from that in Accra, Ghana, because for Inglewood, this came out of funding that was coming out of UCLA for the California Statewide Task Force on Reparations. And we were able to utilize that funding to support the closure of the task force through an exhibition that Auttrianna was then able to curate, and I supported on the production of. And then following up from that, we had the Accra Reparations conference that the African Union had just closed out on in November. So it was fitting in following up from that in December that I was able to then partner with Sana Afedu in Accra to then I can so that I can curate as Niake and he can produce the follow-up exhibition from that, which was then titled A Divination of Enjoyment for the month that we were there. So yeah, I would say looking at needs, wants, desires, values within the local context of where we're producing has been informative to doing that level of connection based on the question you asked.
And that sounds like that was a perfect platform for this title, The Remedy of Solidarity. So take us back in the beginning of this project, which I understand is a 3-volume project. Give us some details about where this started and how we got here.
Well, the name actually and the whole concept for doing a multimedia anthology was informed by a good mentor and family friend, Duruba bin Wahad, formerly of the Black Panther Party, who led the Harlem chapter and was featured in the book Asada. We had both met in Harlem at the time. He had just come back from Ghana, as he lives there between there and Atlanta. And he was actually back given his health condition for cancer treatment. And it was actually at that point in time that we met at a cafe just to catch up on life. And he's been a great mentor of mine over the years. And I think following up from Who Owns Black Art, we wanted to scale up the impact and start to further the work that we had started with Who Owns Black Art. And so, as you know, during the pandemic, we did Aesthetically Pleasing, where we're able to sell some of the work and find collaborative ways where we can find people to purchase who were interested in purchasing work during that time. And that found itself to be very successful using that Clubhouse Instagram format. And then from that point on, he had referenced his book Look for Me in the Whirlwind, which is an anthology that includes several other organizers of the Black Panther Party that are included in that book, including the late Sekou Odinga. And so that talking about that book gave me the blueprint, if you will, to be like, well, I don't want to write a textbook anthology, but because I work in arts and culture, what would a multimedia anthology look like that had this physical presence through immersive participatory exhibitions, galleries, experiences, activations, and then pairing that with an online component. And so I would say the other influences for the anthology were also Lovecraft Country, because they had a whole VR experience that paralleled the show, where you can get, a libretto, if you will, kind of bibliography of like references of like, okay, this episode was based on the Tulsa massacres, and I was really interested in that too, along with an organization called um, We the Design. They did a whole touring exhibition on redlining practices across the United States. So, I would say Daruba through Look for Me in the Whirlwind, this piece around the Lovecraft Country Sanctum series and We the Design's redlining series all kind of informed me being like, I don't want to necessarily do a textbook anthology, but I do want to experiment with like what are the different mediums and tapping into people's learning styles that can support and educating people about reparations. And I had also just left um, Policy Link through the founding of an organization called Liberation Ventures that I supported in creating, where all of their work was focused on building a national movement towards reparations. And I saw that the gap area in building policy around winning on reparations was the cultural aspect of it. If we don't change culture, how are we going to win politically on issues? And how are they going to be sustainable? So I was like, the anthology would be a perfect cultural strategy to be able to build public will so that we can uh, build sustainable momentum and implementation towards reparations when it is achieved across the United States and across the globe. So that's the kind of journey that got me and then others on this journey for the anthology. And because California was the first state to start a process, initiate a process, and it just so happened I had the connection with Auttrianna and learning more about her family and her lineage in terms of her life and her upbringing in San Francisco. I was like, oh, this is perfect. That's why I was like, this is divinely ordained that we are to work together on this.
Now, Auttrianna, I have to ask you about this family history in this project.
Yeah, so I think how I also came into Remedy of Solidarity was that when they were talking about reparations, and I was saying that I think that is a very important way to get the conversation to be more dynamic and inclusive would be through community activation. And the main way that I do that is through art exhibitions and art programming. But also my ties to that. So I was born and raised in San Francisco, and my family got there in the 1930s from Oklahoma, Arkansas, and Mexico. Um, and we, we were part of the Black community in Hunters Point, Baby Hunters Point, San Francisco, which is our there's two main Black neighborhoods. There's Baby Hunters Point and there's the Fillmore, which Fillmore has been like gentrified, so it's pretty much white again now. But yeah, I mean, I have a family that was involved in politics, that was involved in activism. Um, on my mother's side, I come from the Rogers, and due to the legacy of my family, there's a park named after my great uncle because he was an activist who worked with Mayor Moscone, and um, yeah, and the Alioto family, which are San Francisco political families. Um, and I, being a part of the community, being active in activism, like my grandmother used to take me to political events when I was a kid. Like my first memory, like my memories of her as a kid are me getting like donuts at 1000 Van Ness, which used to be like a political center of the city. And I was, but anyways, but San Francisco to me, something else that I saw a lot growing up was the inequality because I grew up in public housing in San Francisco. And my parents were, teen parents, and that was a vastly different life than the life that I was put into when I was around 8 years old. And my mother put me in private, pretty much all white school in a neighborhood called Pacific Heights, on the opposite side of the city. And that was starkly different experience, being around that level of wealth, but also seeing the way that San Francisco exists to the world as a beacon of liberal thought and like progressiveness, but ignores and oppresses its Black people. And also many of the first like racially discriminatory laws that were put into law in the U.S. started in San Francisco. Like we're talking about, like the first anti-drug law was against the Chinese, right? And that was in San Francisco. And we're talking about a neighborhood like Fillmore was Black, but before it was Black, it was Japanese, and then those Japanese were put into internment camps. So there's a real deep legacy of racism in San Francisco that is not really explored. And there gets to be this sort of band-aid that's put on everything as if it's a super green city, right? But when you look up, the Environmental Protection Agency has Superfund sites, right, where there's so much toxic waste. And that was where I grew up. And that was where the city was fine with its black people, its black and Samoan and Pacific Islander people living, um, while they got to be the first city to put in all these things that were good for the environment, or like all these things like no smoking bans, and like the king of recycling in San Francisco, and like all of this stuff. And so for me, as someone who's been fortunate enough to travel and live outside of the Bay Area, it's been incredibly important for me to talk about this and to bring to light the realities of San Franciscans.
So reparations is complicated, though it shouldn't be complicated, right? It was a promise made to us. It was a promise made to African Americans, our ancestors who were forced into this land, who were forced to build a country, and then told that you can't benefit from anything that you built. And if you want freedom, go off and figure it out on your own, and don't be too good at it because we're going to destroy that too, right? So to say that we're old is an understatement. But even though we're starting to have these conversations, and I would say that George Floyd really amplified these conversations, this still hasn't caught on, I think, as much as we would have liked it to. I am on from Florida. We all know the fun that's happening here, right? Good times. So, just the other day in Miami-Dade County for Black History Month, a parent had to sign a field trip so that their child could go listen to a story time that was a story from a Black author about Black life, right? So that this is the time that we're living in. Um, but even though these stories have been amplified, is it easier now for you to have these conversations, or do you still find yourself dealing with some resistance?
I think it's harder because I feel like the George Floyd, the post George Floyd era, I feel like there's a sort of, okay, well, we did that. We're kind of tired about talking about race now.
Right.
We bought the Ibrahim Kende book and we figured it out. So thanks. Um, and it's, yeah, and I think that there's not a real understanding of what what and why we need reparations,
Right.
and what was in, like, not even what was done. I mean, slavery is like such an obvious thing, right? But like, not even what was done during slavery, but what was done during, Jim Crow South, or like the realities of the Great Migration happened not because people just wanted to leave, but people were escaping the horrible white violence and wrath, right? And
Right.
so to then have these neighborhoods where they escaped and built, these new homes for themselves, to have them be places that they can no longer even inhabit because of gentrification. Like, there's levels and layers of violence that need to be restored through multiple means, and not just, financial. But yeah, I don't feel like, I feel like there was a real peak moment where it was like the most, like, celebrity influencers were literally putting aside their Instagrams to have black people talk over, like, it was kind of a wild time.
Right.
But um and I feel like, and it scared me because it felt like when you make like black justice a trend like that, what happens when it goes away?
Right.
And um and then how do we honor, like, the folks who are constantly doing that work, whether or not it's trendy to be black or to be in support of black people?
I think the challenge is hence again the title, the remedy is solidarity. I think that what comes into question is what kind of solidarity are we talking about? And I think what Auttrianna was just so seamlessly was able to depict for us is just how much, especially in the United States, and I think by extension globally, we treat solidarity as a symbolic action and a gesture, um, rather than really being serious about how it is part of a cultural lifestyle that inhabits real power, political power, and economic power, that it changes the material realities for all of us in our humanity. Because I think that the problem, even with George Floyd being a flashpoint, it depicted that the only time you care about Black life is when we're dead, you know, or when violence is inflicted upon us, um, with so much depravity. And I think that has been the history of not only, I would say, the experience of blackness in the United States, but I would also harken back to the transatlantic slave trade. And it's the reason why we don't even have what we would now describe as a brain drain. When you literally have souls and spirits of a people who have been literally disconnected and detached, that we're dealing with so much trauma that we don't see ourselves in each other, which I think has been the other complexity, I think, to this issue of reparations. That I think a lot of our healing work that we get to do, as a people, has to be around belonging to each other. But I think for myself, as someone who's a first generation Ghanaian American in a country that was actually created for folks to return to, politically, once we gained our independence, I take it very seriously that, even as I speak on this call, that I both see Auttrianna and Melissa as my family, that we are
Mhm.
kindred spirits in a journey. And I think it's the other reason why, I don't think we've never talked about it explicitly, Auttrianna, but I think our collaboration and our working relationship is also one that resembles, the intention and the hope of what it will look like for all of us to be free, and be truly liberated, and see our thriving and our support and solidarity of each other in our own livelihood. As both of us are creatives, both of us have stories to tell in terms of our own family lineage. I have family who have direct ties to chieftaincy and queen motherhood back home in Ghana, who have a particular relationship to land and resources. And so, how do those stories get told? And that was much of my journey, actually curating the third volume of the anthology, back home in Ghana, where we just did the exhibition for, a divination of enjoyment, which, was very much about African cosmology, spirituality, rooted in some of these traditions of tribal peoples back home, and what connection does that have around reparations to the entire diaspora? So, yeah, saying all that to say that I do agree with Auttrianna that it does make it more difficult, especially, in the United States, as you're seeing, lawsuits, and claims being made around reverse discrimination and racism. The pulling back on DEI initiatives. The lawsuit that was just filed against a Fearless Fund to support Black women-owned businesses. And I think some of the, tug of war that we're actually seeing, as we literally are seeing global war conflict, and seeing where major private endowed foundations that are supporting the arts, where they fall in that spectrum in their beliefs around colonialism, imperialism, and how their business practice in dealing with artists, either fuel the legacy of slavery and settler colonialism in our economy, or whether they're willing to shift and change and not, reinforce some of those same dynamics in terms of their own, business practice in dealing with artists and creatives. So it's a very, as I try to say, it's a wild time. We've been, I feel like we had George Floyd, and then with the pandemic, and so it's, I think what it's calling on us though to do, I think, again, given this multimedia anthology and these art exhibitions, is to use them as an invitation back into our humanity. I feel like art always has the power to do that. And so sometimes it's not going to happen through you know, and nothing wrong with, the anti-racism workshops and all that, but we got to meet our people where they are at. And so sometimes the best way to do that is through movies, it's through music, it's through art.
So when we pick up the Remedy of Solidarity, what should we be looking for when we pick up our first volume?
Yeah, when you pick up the first set of volumes for this first pilot, you should definitely look out for the introduction by Daruba bin Wahad and a beautiful video, which is an interview from the past from Queen Mother Audrey Moore, who is really considered, also the Queen Mother of not only just this contemporary reparations movement, but by extension, Black liberation work and organizing at a global level. And so they're both introducing the anthology, the multimedia anthology, in the initial intro, and then in the next three volumes, you will then the first one you'll get an actual reprisal of all of the work we've done in Miami from Who
Okay.
Owns Black Art. You'll see Jojo Abbott, my also Ghanaian sister, who is in conversation with Marie Vickles at IPC Art Center, Art Space in Little Haiti, and they're having these conversations about what does it mean to reckon with not only just the stolen land, but also the stolen artifacts of our people. And what does it mean to rightfully return those things? And what kind of processes of accountability and redress should we have? And how do we navigate that in ways that uphold our autonomy as Black people across the diaspora? Yeah, and then you'll look out for Auttrianna in volume two, and I'm gonna let her speak more about In the Midst of the Imagined and how that experience was for her in curating.
In the Midst of the Imagined was definitely one of my favorite shows that I've curated. I think even just for me personally, in the process of being able to trust myself in a new space, like LA was is a new community for me, and or at least the art community is a new community for me, and I loved working with the artists. So we worked, as I said earlier, we worked with Leah King, Benga Komalafe, Nandi Jordan, and House of Amma. And the show title was inspired by a Lucille Clifton poem, and there's a line where she says, "As we imagined," right? Like how we imagined this space of reimagining ourselves, right? And I think that that to me connected to the reparations conversation because I didn't want it to be so literal, but wanted to think about like this new space of us creating what would our life be like if we were restored and repaired by reparations, like if the job was actually done, and like what are ways that we can imagine, and whether that be rest or whether that be art making, whether that be like more time for community. And I think those were some of the ways that we were able to bring that into conversation was through our programming, through our talks, and through our community workshops, and also just our relationship with each other, like with the artists. And yeah, I mean, I think that In the Midst of the Imagined was a great show, great artist, and super proud of that exhibition. And I'm also um, very proud to be able to present thoughtful contemporary artwork in a space of a conversation that is not in the contemporary art space.
So once we pick up our volumes, what should what questions do we need to prepare when we pick them up? And what are your hopes for us? after we take in all of the beautiful images and take in all of the words and the information, what do you want us to walk away from? What should we be doing next?
Right after In the Midst of the Imagined, we also have A Divination of Enjoyment that was produced in Ghana, and it was my first time curating actually an exhibition, and so there was a lot that I was able to learn from Auttrianna's process of curation that really then informed my own pathway to be able to produce. Because I would say there was a lot around thinking about, you know, the actual theme, the curatorial statement, the look and feel of the space, the environment that I was envisioning that folks would have of an experience of, what does it mean to, um, think about enjoyment, especially during December, during the holidays. And I was looking at these dualities of crisis and celebration in Accra and by extension in Ghana during that time, because everybody is coming from, the States, from the Caribbean, from all across the world to now be in Ghana. And so I was, juxtaposing that to, the previous exhibition where we're in Englewood. Englewood is, facing severe gentrification. We're in California, where there's this backdrop of this California Reparations Task Force hearing, and yet we have Auttrianna, who is curating this exhibition at the close of it, and is able to think about, even around, I think, just to put you on, Front Street, Auttrianna, just in terms of your ability to think about, color schemes and the different artist needs, and even bringing them together. Like, all of those were things that I really admired, and just feel like are assets to who you are as a curator. And so those things, very much carried over, I feel like, and energetically into the follow-up exhibition. And so I feel like in A Divination of Enjoyment, what at least I was able to witness, even in its own creation, were you had artists such as Francis Kokoroko, who amazing photographer based in Accra. He just did the photos for the New York Times spread on Ghana, and it's up and coming, even though we all know it's been there, art scene. In collaboration with Sel Kofika, they did a beautiful piece, reprising Madonna and the Child. You have folks like Afia Sirwa, who had pieces like Joke Like Play, or Zayn Asiyama. They both came out of Art Artists, which is one of those, now world-renowned art collectives that's based in Ghana, and they were able to be a part of this exhibition. Or folks like Mr. Kwabena Yaboa and his godson, also who participated in the exhibition, Salom Fiajo. And just in terms of looking at the collection of their works, including my own and my own curatorial text, touching the exhibition, and being able to collaborate with folks like Cedric Mitchell, who's based here in LA, who supported me in my glass blowing journey during the pandemic. All of those facets, I think, allowed for me to tell a story of how, Anansi the Spider is one of these characters that's not only a mythology, but also is a spiritual guide in many ways to the Akana Shanti people. How I was able to use that character to tell the story about how can we look at ourselves, our reflections, and see ourselves amidst crisis and celebration, and I think that's part of the spirit of imagining, which I think got carried over, I think very much subconsciously, probably in my mind, as I was curating this exhibition for the anthology. And this was the last exhibition in this initial pilot for our launch. And so I think people should look out for, I think first thing, is, if, as it's fittingly titled, The Remedy is Solidarity. What are the remedies that they need for their hearts, minds, and spirits? And how is this content that they're going to be engaging in terms of the conversations that you'll see in the anthology amongst the artists? How will that feed their spirits? How may that inspire them to want to engage in this work around reparations and their own repair work. That could be within their families, within their communities. And I also think that the anthology, there's just something about seeing and listening, because it's a multimedia anthology. I think I'm inviting all of us, even myself. I feel like this experience has challenged me around my own seeing and hearing. Um,
Right.
it really has, especially again, starting with Auttrianna's exhibition. My level of seeing has definitely shifted because of the collaboration in the work. And I think the same goes for my exhibition. I think it's going to challenge people to see in new ways. And I think because of the use of sound also throughout these volumes, there's a soundscape that is featured in a definition of enjoyment, but in the midst of the Imagine, they actually did a program where like they were using ambient sound. So I feel like the use of sound in install and exhibition work is also something that's going to be exciting as these exhibitions roll out.
So the remedy of solidarity talks about reparations and brings us to through the lens of culture. What would reparations look like before we go? What would reparations look like for creatives of color? How would you imagine that to look, Alan?
Well, if we think about a holistic process of repair, as Auttrianna mentioned, that extends beyond cash payment. I think it includes that for sure. And I think universal basic income can be one of those key pieces in the policy portfolio that speaks to cash payment. But I think for Black creatives, some of what we've experienced in our journey, even in the production of this exhibition, like I think about galleries, Black owned galleries like Residency Art Gallery, where we hosted the first exhibition pilot, which is ran by Rick Garzon. Like I imagine, like, what if we had cooperatively ran and driven Black galleries and institutions where there can be community reinvestment funds where galleries like Rick's can be sustained, and that there's a level of workforce development and staffing capacity where um, creatives get to not only exhibit their work, but exhibit their work in ways that don't limit them. They can look at a variety of different creative value chains where their work can be not only exhibited in the gallery, but it could also be on a TV show. It can also be on a scarf. It can also be in a multitude of different places, and that the artist can also explore their different talents and skill sets in ways that are useful to them. Um, but also, I think in that same vein, where artists and creatives can also have the space to rest, dream, and imagine, um, as Auttrianna also mentioned earlier. So, like, where can artists find balance in their own livelihoods? And I think that the legacy of slavery and settler colonialism in this country have robbed Black people of that, because we have been in constant production mode since the origins of this country, as you so beautifully laid out, Melissa. And I think that's the hard truth of it. So my hope is that reparations becomes a healing process in and of itself that allows for creatives to create a sustainable living, where they're not having to worry about dollar signs hanging over their head, but rather how to live a sustainable life that also supports their families and their communities in meaningful ways that create really equanimity and balance and peace. Especially given all of the conflict that we're experiencing right now in the globe. So that's what I see as a vision for what it could look like.
Autриana, what does it look like for you?
I think I'm very much on the same page as Alan, UBI, universal basic income, um, more education, like more global community, and ways to enhance that, I think, are through education and, yeah, more distribution of wealth, I think is super important because I think about, the privilege of knowing oneself, right? And of learning one's history and who gets access to that. I mean, of course, there's passed down knowledge that we have, like, different, like, culturally, but we talk about, like, the deeply ingrained histories, like the histories that are in the archive, um, thinking about who gets to travel to go to archives, who gets to go to university and take this time to study and not have to worry about getting a major where they have to worry about making a living after that. So they're not going to actually study a
Right.
history, right? Um, and just, yeah, so for me, like education is super important. And who's dictating the terms of the education is important. Um, but yeah, just more power to the people. And like, I mean, I said yes, but yes, this is reparations for me.
Alan, Auttrianna, thank you so much for your time. And really, before we go, where are we going to be able to find all of this? Do we just only buy this from Zeal? Will this be in bookstores?
So my hope, I think that, and shout out, thank you for still putting out the bookstores. Our hope is to get something published, but for now, you can find the website will be theremedyissolidarity.com. Theremedyissolidarity.com, and you will be able to find the first 3 volumes there on our website. So that's theremedyissolidarity.com. We'll also have a hyperlink on our Zeal website, but yeah, you can find us there, and knock on wood, we may be able to publish something. So that'd be something for Auttrianna and I to think about, maybe with you, Melissa.
Oh, that sounds like a plan.
you know,
Alan, Auttrianna, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.